Alright guys, I just took my wire wheel and I went over the whole knuckle. So this is a little after I brushed it with this guy right here. My wire wheel, now I'm going to go over it with some wax and grease remover and then give it a good coat of Steel-It. Alright guys, here is the knuckle before I spray it with some Steel-It. This is really good stuff. I would highly recommend it. It is expensive, but man, does it do a good job. So there is the knuckle after I did the wax and grease remover. Now time to lay on a can of paint. Alright guys, as you can see, I have all the suspension components taken out. And I am ready to install the brand new lower control arm. As you can see, the bushings are obviously brand new, looking nice and clean. There is the new ball joint. And just in case you're wondering, this is the lower control arm that I am using. So first thing we need to do is I need to put this on a jack stand and then jack it up to where I can align the bolts through each of those bushings and get it actually mounted on the chassis first. Then we can start attaching everything to this lower control arm. So that's step number one. Let's get our jack. This is where a good set of gloves, a dead blow hammer, and some patience goes a long way. Alright guys, here's a good tip. You'll see that one end is kind of, I don't know what you'd call that, like beveled or whatever. It's just a lot easier for the lower control arm to get in. Start with the other end that is flat. This one is much harder to get the lower control arm into. So I would suggest do this one first and then try to get it into the bracket that is much easier to get it into. So on the driver's side, it's this one over here. Definitely do this one first. So I got to work on that. This one took me about maybe 10 minutes to get in. So not bad. Of course, you need to have your jack supporting it. And remember, these two studs is where the shock or the strut are mounted to. So you do not want to damage these. So make sure you do not jack these up. Make sure your jack is kind of in the middle inboard bound of the lower control arm. All right, I got those in. I'm going to leave those loose, torque everything to spec. But for now, I'm just going to leave it hand tight like that. So let's move on. How about let's install the upper control arm next. All right guys, here is my new upper control arm. There is the part number right there. Comes with a cotter pin, a new nut, and a washer. So that's nice. And these ball joints are also greasable. So that's nice as well. So just gonna throw this in there and put the bolts through it. Alright guys, another tip here. This upper control arm goes in a lot smoother if you spray the ends of the bushings with some silicone lubricant. So makes all the difference. So I would highly recommend that. So this is our setup right now. Lower control arm is just hanging out. So is the upper control arm. So next I need to get my newly painted knuckle. Let me show you guys what that looks like. Check this out, man. This is the Steel-It paint. This looks so good. It is looking nice and fresh. Ready to go in the truck. Alright guys, I have the lower control arm supported with the jack and my upper control arm there. I'm about to take this knuckle and connect it first on this lower ball joint and then tighten that down and then connect it to the upper ball joint, and then we can connect these two and begin our installation process of everything connected to this knuckle. Alright guys, so I have the upper control arm connected to the knuckle and I have the jack underneath the lower control arm because we are about ready to put in our spring and the spring insulator inside the lower control arm. Then we can jack it up and then we can slip the lower control arm into our knuckle. But let's not forget this one. There is the part number. This is a brand new bump stop. Brand new OEM bump stop. So it goes in this little area right there. You just kind of push and twist it in there. So this is what it looks like right now. I have my red jack supporting the middle of the lower control arm, while my other jack jacks up the end of the lower control arm ball joint. What I'm doing here is with this one I'm compressing the spring, and well, first I had to do this one because this is my low profile jack, and then I got this one underneath it. So once I compress the spring more with this jack, I will then remove this jack and put the lower control arm and hook it up into the knuckle and put on the lower ball joint bolt. So that's the stage I'm at. If you just put the torque wrench directly on this, guys, by the way, it will just spin. So I have been using my crescent wrench to turn the nut here while I hold the very end with my 14mm. So you kind of have to do that. Once it gets tight, then you can go back and use your torque wrench to apply the final torque. One, 2, 3, 22, 23. Looking good. Let's get our tie rod in, torque down to 45 foot-pounds. Alright guys, these are what I am using. This is the Bilstein 4600 series. It does come with some bushings and some washers in there. So I'm going to install this next. I have the washer and the bushing already on the shock absorber. So I'm just going to push it all all the way up into the tower. And then once I get some threads here, I can start putting on these two nuts on the bottom of the shock. These are both 13 millimeter, and they get torqued down to 25 foot-pounds. Okay, now we put our bushing that came with the shock absorber, and then the top hat here, we'll tighten those down, and then the lock nut. Alright, to tighten the lock nut down, you need to put a 19 millimeter on the nut, and then I have a 9 millimeter to hold the top of it while I tighten this one down. After this is good and tight, then you can get out your torque wrench to 40 foot-pounds. Tightened down, ready to go. Alright, our next step is to put in the sway bar end link. Alright guys, you can see the sway bar end link right there. There is a hole in the lower control arm right there. You can see the bottom of the end link with the nut just hand threaded on. That nut right there gets torqued down to 75 foot-pounds. This one is a 19 millimeter, and then you have to hold the sway bar end link so it doesn't move. With this part of the end link, this is an 18 millimeter, and this is a 19 millimeter. So I'm going to get my torque wrench and try to get this down to 75 foot-pounds. Alright guys, I guess just a couple more things to install. I need to install the sway bar, but before I do that, I think I'm going to try to mount this brand new wheel bearing that I have. This is a SKF brand. It is one of their hybrid wheel bearings. So comes with a brand new wheel bearing and that is a ABS sensor, so that is nice. And it mounts to the hub, total of 3 bolts. This longer one right here is the one at the top up here. So I'm going to mount this, and then we can torque these big bolts down. Alright guys, before you start threading in your bolts to the hub, to the knuckle, make sure that you just have the hub nice and flush, as flush as you can get it. I used a dead blow hammer to get it as flush as I could, because you don't want to, have this in crooked or anything, because you may ruin your hub or your bolts or both. So just take note of that. Try to have this as flush as possible before you start threading in those bolts. Then these get torqued down to 130 foot-pounds, 18 millimeter.